Hi, you're watching the video RängeMeister A First Look. When you run RängeMeister for the first time, you go through the setup wizard. The setup wizard is going to attempt to auto-detect your database settings. So once it's done that, you can hit test connection and you can see that it works, or you can change any settings that you want. When you go to the next screen, RängeMeister will show you a list of your databases. You can pick one or many of these databases to index. I'm going to select only this RMDev because this is the one I used for development. Next, you select any applicable filters. Maybe you want to only index hands from certain sites or certain stakes or during a given time period. We'll hit next, and then on the final screen it prompts us to either create a new database or use the existing RängeMeister database that I had from before. RängeMeister stores all of its indexing information on its own database, so it won't interfere with your poker tracker or Hold'em Manager database. So now we'll hit finish and we're ready to use RängeMeister. Once you've completed this wizard, RängeMeister will begin indexing your hands. In this situation, I've stopped indexing, but when you run it yourself, you'll see down here a status bar. One thing to note is that you do not need to finish indexing all of your databases in order to use RängeMeister. As long as you've done a good amount of hands, then you should have at least some results when you do a search. So with that, I'll go ahead and do a search. What we do is we enter a partial hand history and click search. So we'll look at the hand that we entered here, which is a hand where I open raise, get one caller, and then on the flop I make about a 2/3 pot size continuation bet and get min raised. And so when we do a search initially, the only thing it's looking for are the actions. So the open raise, the call, the continuation bet, and the min raise. And what we found are 382 similar hands. And these hands are sorted initially by how similar they are. So before we continue, I want to point out these letters alpha and omega. And the purpose of these letters is to help you identify which player corresponds to you and which player corresponds to your enemy in the similar hands. The alpha means last player to act, omega means next player to act. And you can see in all of these hands, the player that is me will mean omega. So it makes sense that if these hands are sorted by most similar, the first hand that would show up is actually the hand that we just played. So we can watch how this hand ended, and we can see that I called, check called the turn, and then check folded the river. So kind of a weak play. And what we can do is we can look at these similar hand histories and we can see how other people might have played it, or things like what kind of a hand range does this alpha have to be min raising me. But 382 hands is quite a few to look through. So the first thing we can do to reduce this number is we can filter it to make sure we have hands that are only very similar to the one that we entered. So if we show the HUD, you can see that the alpha player here is a player that plays 29-20, 28% aggression, and his classification is gambler. So what we want to do is go to filters, and we can filter the alpha. Instead of showing all player types, what we can do is we can maybe reduce it just down to gamblers and tags, since these two are fairly similar. And these ratings are the Hold'em Manager auto ratings. And so now we hit apply, and we're down to 95 hands for 382. So it's less to look at. And what we can do is we can just browse through some of these hands. You can see here that this player, who's a different player, went ahead and did the same raise, but he did it with top pair, top kicker, and he ran into an overpair. And if we play through this hand, you see that the omega player, instead of just calling as I did, he shoved and got a call, and he won a buy-in. And we can look through the additional hands. We can see how other players dealt with the same situations. So for example, here we have the alpha making another raise after the omega re-raises. So you can see that if I would have tried to re-raise, there's a chance that the alpha player does another raise. And we can just look at these hands to get an idea. But one thing we can do is we can take some of the data that's present from these similar hands, and we can just look at it all at once. So if we look back at the original hand, I'm the omega, and we can see, okay, how do players typically react to the re-raise? And you'll see that the majority of the time players do fold. Occasionally you get a call, and rarely you get a raise. Also, what we can do is we can look at the alpha player's range, and we can see the different types of hands that he'll do this with. And if you look at these alpha omega tabs, they also have, for all of the hands that are shown here, the average winning for the alpha player was 52 cents per hand. For the omega player, you'll see it's a losing situation with 47 cents a hand. And what we can do is we can actually estimate the expected value based on our own hole cards. And we can see that we would still be losing potentially 74 cents a hand. So the conclusion that this helps me draw is that we're behind the alpha player's range. Of course, before we really draw that conclusion, we want to look at as many of these hands as we can. So you see here was a situation where the alpha player was weaker, and just different things like that. We need to use our own reasoning skills to draw conclusions. This is just a tool to help us. It's not going to tell us what the right play is. Another thing we can do is we can go back to the original and we can continue the simulation. So we can say, well, what if I re-raise here? So I can do size up a re-raise, hit it, and now I refresh. And now these 52 hands will be based on the fact that I'm the alpha player now, since I was the last one to act, and the player who before was the alpha is now the omega, since he's the next player to act. So we can actually look at these different hands, and we can see, okay, like, what's the reaction here to a re-raise? And you can see in this situation he folded, and we can actually look like, okay, what is the chances of him folding? And you see he doesn't fold all that often. In fact, he may re-raise or he may just call. And so what we can do is we can just explore through the hands, and we can gather data, and we can do the analyses, but we get a little bit of help, and that's really the purpose of this program. Thank you.